for September 8th, 2017. Since my last update, I have not really added any new content to the site as far as completed audio tracks, and there are several reasons for that. And no, it does not mean that I took the past 2 weeks off. Quite the contrary. I've been very busy working on the site in one way or another because I have come across more information and I have decided to add even more content to my Disneyland After Dark and my Disneyland Bandstand, my new Disneyland Bandstand chapter that I added, which I explained on my last video because the After Dark chapter was getting way too long with over 140 tracks, so I split them up. If you want more details on that, go back and listen to my video from 2 weeks ago. Before I get started, though, I do want to express my concern and give a little bit of a group prayer for those in the path of Hurricane Irma. Please be safe. If you are asked to evacuate your area, don't try to ride out the storm. Do what you're told and leave the area. It's not, you know, it's a major storm. It may be the most powerful hurricane that has ever hit Florida on record, and it's serious. So please be safe. Stock up on all your supplies now. If you don't have bottled water, please fill up all your pots and pans with water in advance so that if something happens to the water supply, you're stocked up with plenty of safe drinking water. Just play it safe, and my prayers and thoughts go out to everybody in Florida. That being said, let's move on to some happy news. First of all, one of the reasons why I didn't add as much content as I would have liked to have added is because I had to set up my special Supercalifragilistic September month-long tribute to the Sherman Brothers on my website. So every song this month will be a favorite Sherman Brothers song with a few obscure ones thrown in for fun. I do want to point out, though, that I made a mistake yesterday, and my song from September 7th, Thomas O'Malley, the Alley Cat, well, it turns out this is not a Sherman Brothers song. The movie The Aristocats is really confusing because there are multiple songwriters in this film. The Sherman Brothers apparently only wrote, I think, 3 songs out of all the songs in The Aristocats. They wrote the title song, The Aristocats, sung by Maurice Chevalier. They wrote Scales and Arpeggios, and then they wrote a song that ended up not being used called She Never Felt Alone, which was actually cut from the film. So I assumed that they also wrote Thomas O'Malley, the Alley Cat. I know that they did not write Everybody Wants to Be a Cat. For a long time I thought they did, but I learned that a while ago that they did not write that, even though it sounds like a Sherman Brothers song, as does this song, Thomas O'Malley, the Alley Cat. And I just learned something new yesterday when a lot of people came back to me and said, that's not a Sherman Brothers song. Apparently, it's a song by Terry Gilkinson, who's the same person who actually wrote another Phil Harris song called The Bare Necessities for Disney. So that makes a lot of sense. So I decided to leave the song anyway because a lot of people really like this song, including myself. So a little bit of a artistic license there, but I don't want to mislead anybody. It's not officially a Sherman Brothers song, but there are a lot of Sherman Brothers songs in this film, so I decided, what the heck, I'll just leave it. So far I've done 8 songs, and there's more to come throughout the month. And next month will be my yearly Halloween month, starting October 1st. And I sort of flip-flop. On On one year, I just do Halloween-themed, general Halloween-themed songs all month. And then the next year, I do tribute to the Disney villains. Well, last year, I did my general Halloween. So this year is going to be the tribute to the Disney villains. So every song throughout October will be a song about the Disney villains, like Cruella de Vil and Poor Unfortunate Souls and those type of songs all month long. So look forward to that in October. Now, let me show you, in this folder I have a couple articles that I came across which kind of explain what happened and why I didn't get through as much as I would have liked to have gotten through. I mentioned on my last episode that a few months ago I mentioned that I wanted to find out the names of the artists that performed at a After Dark event at Disneyland in 1981 called the Rollin' River Review. Well, a person named Jim Hill, who does a podcast called The Disney Dish, he actually read an article that named a lot of the performers. But then what happened is I opened up Pandora's box and I found another article. This is the article. I'm opening it right now. It takes a second. Bear with me. This is an unedited video. This article right here, it's kind of hard to see unless you make it big, lists all of these artists that appeared at the Rollin' River Review. At first, that's what I thought. And each week had a musical theme, just like Jim Hill described it. But in addition to the few artists he named, there were all these other artists that he did not name. So where I was originally going to just create a medley of all the artists that would probably run about an hour, when I came across this article, I was like, uh-oh. If I make a medley of all these artists, it's going to be like 5 hours long or more. And I was also, I was still confused because, again, no Pearl Bailey, no Pete Fountain, all these other people that I know were part of the festival. So then I came across this article, which is hard to see because it's just part of the page. Now on this article, it goes beyond, see this one ends on June 13th, but this one starts on June 26th. So obviously the concert series was extended beyond this, what this article originally advertises. So putting two and two together, I came up with probably what is going on here, or what was going on. The first several weeks of this Rollin' River Review, the park had these music festivals going on park-wide that encompassed the Rollin' River Review as well. Throughout May and early June, they had a surfer week, they had a swing week, a country, a jazz, a Latin music, a pop music, and a bluegrass week. But this was not just involving the Rollin' River Review, this was involving all of the entertainment going on all over the park all evening long. And the jazz week, it was Saturday nights, but the jazz week was Saturday and Sunday. It was 2 weeks. That's why there's even more people that did the jazz. But these were not all artists that performed at the Rollin' River Review. Some of them did, but some of them played at the Carnation Plaza Gardens or at the Space Stage. It's just entertainment like all over the park, and just one aspect of it was the Rollin' River Review. So that solved the riddle of why so many names here, because it's not really explained that well in this. It's not really an article. It's more of a full-page ad from the, I think it's from the, yeah, it's from the Los Angeles Times, 1981. So what happened is after this themed music festival weeks that went on through June, May, and early June. That ended, but the Roland River Review continued on throughout the entire summer. So after the themed week performers, they just had a bunch of random performers at the Roland River Review every week after that throughout the summer that weren't really tied to a specific theme. They were just entertainers on their own right. So the Pointer Sisters, Pearl Bailey, Brenda Lee, Pete Fountain. Here's where all those people come in that I wondered why they weren't part of the other part. So Jesse Dixon and the Dixon Singers, Billy Crash Craddock, Shalimar, Patty Page, who was also in the themed weeks. She came back for a second appearance, which is interesting. And the Lennon Sisters from the Lawrence Welk Show. And then there was an extra week that's not mentioned in this article that Doc Severinsen, the leader of the Tonight Show band, performed in the final week of this event. So this I opened up Pandora's box. Not only did I find the names of the artists, I found more than I thought there were. And this event lasted long, from May through mid-September, every week. So I ended up having to kind of rethink and rearrange my 2 chapters accordingly. And that's part of what led to me not being able to add new content, because I had to come up with a solution on how to represent all of these entertainers. So I will go through Chapter 20, Disneyland After Dark, and show you all the changes. Now that I gave you a little bit of backstory on one of the main reasons I made some changes, I'm going to also talk about some of the other changes that I've made in order of the chapter. So far, as I'm scrolling down, all this has remained unchanged. I'm still adding some new things. Cavalcade of Big Bands, which is currently on the site, I'm going to be extending it. I'm going to be adding some additional artists that I originally left out. Just a few extra songs. Right now it's about 50 minutes long. It's going to end up being about an hour long. So I'm just adding a little bit to it so it's a little bit more complete. Because originally I had left out 1 or 2, or I think 3 important bands that I've decided to go back and add them back in, so that every band that performed at this from 1961, when it first started, up to 1967 is represented. This is another change I made. Originally, I had this the Plantation House on my Disneyland Bandstand chapter, and this was kind of a difficult one for me to figure out how I was going to represent this, because I do know of one band. I only know of one specific band that actually played at this venue. I know a lot of bands did, but there's not any information on what specific bands did. And the one band that I know played there, I can't find any music for. So originally I had this Bernie Bernard and his orchestra represented as one of the big bands who played at the Cavalcade of Big Bands. But I don't have any proof that they participated in that, and they probably didn't. They do have an album that they recorded at the Disneyland Hotel. So I decided to use them to represent the Plantation House, because it is the type of music that would have been played at this venue. And because I don't know for a fact that they played at the other Tomorrowland event, which is represented up in the chapter, I decided this would be a good placeholder, an orchestra to represent the Plantation House. It has the right musical feel to it for the Plantation House. It's not a band that I don't believe they ever performed in Tomorrowland, and they very well may have performed at the Plantation House bandstand. So I decided to move them to this slot. Another thing that I changed is originally I was going to have Skiles and Henderson and the Disneyland Doodlers, but I decided to just represent Skiles and Henderson as a comedy team and just do their comedy routine and not so much their music, mainly because I couldn't find any Disneyland Doodlers music. So I do have over a half hour of an album they recorded around the time they were still performing in Disneyland. So that I've already set up and it's ready for final editing, so that one will be coming soon. Now, this is another one that I added, I believe, unless I'm forgetting what I mentioned on my last video. So forgive me if some of these are things I've already mentioned, because it's a little all muddy in my mind what I had on here 2 weeks ago and what I've since changed. But the Spacebar is going to be a medley of songs that were the type of rock bands that played in Tomorrowland before it became the new Tomorrowland. So from about 1960 to 1966, this is the type of music, and it's mostly like garage band or surfer rock type music that would have been played here. So that's what's represented. All this is pretty much the same as what it was on my last update. So I can skip all over this. Okay, this is something I decided to add. A space stage, space age disco concert, because there's a lot of disco bands that played in Tomorrowland in the late 70s, and I feel like I need to represent them. So I got a bunch of names together of bands that I know performed here at that time, and I'm going to make a medley. So if you're a disco fan, you'll enjoy this one. That's coming soon. So that's something I added. Now this, the Bear Country Hoedown, originally was just going to be a 6-minute kind of introduction that is a pre-recorded little dance routine that was performed by the Kids of the Kingdom at the beginning of this event. But I decided, and I still am kind of questioning whether or not I'm going to do this way. I'm still trying to figure this one out. I found one of the groups that I found that performed at the Carnation Plaza Gardens is called the Nashville Brass, and they really have this sound to them that sounds like the type of hoedown music you would hear at this Bear Country Hoedown event, after hours dancing. And I wouldn't be surprised, I don't have any proof of this, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were involved in that, just because the music sounds perfect for what that was. So I'm considering having the introduction, the pre-recorded Kids of the Kingdom introduction, and then have a medley of songs by the Nashville Brass. It's the type of music that's like country music, well, more like bluegrass music, like Foggy Mountain Breakdown and those type of songs, Wabash Cannonball, those types of songs. But it's performed with like a full orchestra, and it's actually, I really enjoy that music. It's really nice. So I definitely am going to include it somewhere. I haven't decided whether or not I want to include it as a medley. With the main reason I'm kind of weary is the sound quality jumps. The Bear Country Hoedown is pretty decent sound, but it's not stereo, and you know, it's from an old cassette recording that I had to clean up, whereas the music I have for the Nashville Brass is crisp, clear, perfect sounding stereo. So it kind of clashes. It jumps from one type of sound quality into this other, so I don't know if I want to have it be the same track. What I am considering is having this be a separate track, and then following it, track 51 would become the Nashville Brass as a separated thing. I'm kind of leaning to that. I haven't decided yet. It's still open for debate. If anybody has a preference or an opinion on that, let me know. Roland River Review, featured performers. This is what I originally was going to do with this, which is kind of what I mentioned before in this video. The problem is that I found all those other artists. So what this is going to represent on this page, on my other chapter, I'm going to have a more thorough representation of it. But on this version, this track, it's going to be kind of the main performers, highlighting the main, most famous people that performed. So it's kind of an overview of the whole thing, whereas my other version on the other page, which I'm going to show you in just a minute, is going to be a full representation of pretty much every artist that appeared at that event. And I'll show you how I set that up in a minute. And that was one of the main things that I've added since my last video. This all has stayed the same pretty much. Oh, there's one other thing, one other change at the bottom of the page I want to show you. Originally I had this grad night dance party on the bandstand page, but I decided it's not a live band, so I'll put it on the After Dark page. And then someone contacted me and let me know they have the main reason I never wanted to include this grad night blast is the main piece of music, which is a version of A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes, which was originally used for the Step in Time live show at Disney's California Adventure when it first opened. That piece of music is one of those unattainable pieces that a lot of people covet and can't find, and it's kind of the main theme of this event. So I decided I wasn't going to represent it unless I could find that piece of music, and lo and behold, somebody contacted me and let me know that they can probably find that piece of music for me. So this may or may not get added, but I put a spot in it just to be kind of positive and hopeful that he's going to get me that music, so stay tuned for that. So that was pretty much the last major change I made to this chapter. Everything else is pretty much the same as it was before. Now let me show you what I've changed to my new chapter, which is sort of the companion chapter to the After Dark page. My browser's frozen for a minute. There we go. First of all, I got a little bit more stringent on exactly what this chapter is and exactly what goes on this page. And it's anything that's not a live dance, quote-unquote dance band. If it's like a concert where performers are playing music and you're sitting down and watching it, I tried for the most part, with a couple of exceptions, to put that on the After Dark page. This is representing for the most part, with a couple exceptions, which I will explain, dance bands. So I took out a couple things and moved them around. This is pretty much the same. I did have that Disneyland Hotel band in this section, and I told you before I moved it and made it part of the Plantation House instead. That's one change I made. Now, Dixieland and Disneyland was not dance. It was a music festival. I'm sure people were dancing, but it wasn't like a dance band setup. But I included it just because it's so many different artists, and so that's one of the exceptions. Disneyland A Go-Go, this has pretty much stayed the same. Tomorrowland After Dark has stayed the same. I'm adding in this Mickey Finns, which is a group that played at the Tomorrowland space stage, and it's kind of fun because it kind of breaks up the monotony of all this music that's very similar, because it's more Dixieland type music, but it was performed at the space stage. They were popular actually in the late 70s, believe it or not. So Now I did show you that I had a new track on my other page called the Space Age Disco Concert. Originally, this track, which is already finished and on the site, is what was called the Space Age Disco Concert, but it was just one group. So I decided to keep the one group as a separate track and just call out the name of the group, which is Voyager. So that's been changed. Now, this is the major change to this chapter. Every of those weeks that I showed you, I have represented as its own individual track. So I have Surfin' 60s Week, Swing Week, Country Week, Jazz Week, Latin Week, and Pop Week, and Bluegrass Week. And then after all that ended, we had all of those weeks of non-specific themes with just special guest stars, which I also pointed out to you. And I decided to, instead of putting this little squiggly design, that I would name all the different stars that are being represented in this block here. So now it went from being one track that I plan on adding to being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tracks. 8-track. So so that's a major change that I made. And again, this is all stuff I'm working on and gathering the music, and that's another thing that I've been spending time on, is setting up new tracks and finding the music, and that takes a lot of time too. So in addition to setting up these new pages, the new additions, I've also been hunting down the music and everything, and that's still something I'm working on now. Also, I had originally left out some groups that performed at the Plaza Gardens, and I decided that I wanted to kind of represent more and not leave out anything important. So I added in a couple new tracks to this section. One of them is Louis Bellson and the Big Band Explosion. They were they performed at the Carnation Plaza Gardens a lot, so they really need to be represented. So I added this group as its own individual track. But then I went and I was going to add other individual tracks for all of these other artists, but some of them only played at the park once. Like Xavier Cugat is a famous band leader, and it's impressive that Disneyland provided a venue for him, but he only performed in the park once. So it would be nice to represent him, but do I really want to devote an hour of music to him when he was kind of not that significant to the history of Disney, even though he's a significant band leader, famous band leader? So I decided that the ones that I've kind of included in this little mix kind of fit that same mold, where they're famous band leaders, they're well known, but they weren't involved in the early 60s years of the original big band festivals. They came along later in the 70s and 80s, or they only performed in the park once or twice, and it was all in the later years. For example, Freddie Martin, who wrote Flight of the Bumblebee, or Bumble Boogie, based on Flight of the Bumblebee, which was actually made into a Disney short in the 1940s. He started performing in the park not until 1976, but after that, he appeared several times, but he was not, another thing is, he was not involved in the television specials, because the Big Bands in Disneyland television special, I have every artist that appeared in that represented up to, the last one would be Buddy Rich. So, because he didn't appear on that special, then where do I put him? Where does he go? I don't, so I decided all of these kind of random extra groups would go in their own mix. Now, another thing, a reason why I didn't do that with Maynard Ferguson and Louis Bellson is, first of all, Louis Bellson appeared in the park a lot, so he really needs his own track, because he was a staple of the park in the 80s and the 70s even. And Maynard Ferguson A lot of people remember him performing, and he didn't necessarily perform at the Carnation Gardens. He a lot of times just did concerts at the Space Stage and things like that. So, and also his style of jazz is different in that it's more of a modern sound, more of a like 1970s-esque jazz. And the same can be said for Louis Bellson. It's more modern. And it kind of wouldn't fit in with this more big bands mixture because it's not the same kind of more traditional swing music. It's more experimental and later type, swing music from the 70s. So that's why they get their own tracks and these other two don't. There's a logic behind my madness, believe it or not. Everything else pretty much is exactly the same as it was before. So that's where I'm at right now as far as the chapters. I have been adding, I've been working, I'll show you where I'm at as far as setting stuff up. Here's these folders, like this is all the stuff I'm going to be adding to that Space Age disco concert track. This is what I've been gathering. So you can see I've been getting the music together. Here's the music I'm going to be using for Mickey Finn. I found a full album and then several individual tracks by them. And for the Rollin' River Review, I've got Bluegrass Week with music in there. I've got everything organized, so I've been gathering all this music together, getting it ready. Still have a few more artists to find music for. But so that's been going on. And then in this folder marked current project, these are all of the tracks that are ready for final editing. I've already set them up and they're ready to go. With the exception of Bear Country Hoedown, which I mentioned before, I'm not sure if I'm just going to have the 6-minute medley of songs with the Kids of the Kingdom or if I'm going to add the Nashville Brass. That's kind of up in the air. So all of this stuff is ready for final editing. So I've got 24 songs, 24 tracks I should say, ready to be final edited, ready to go. So that's what I've been doing the past 2 weeks. So it may not seem to the outside observer that I've been very busy, but indeed I have been very busy. So that's what's going on. Have a terrific final weeks of the summer. The dog days of summer are upon us. Again, those in Florida, stay safe, be smart, hunker down, get your supplies ready. I'm praying for you. And I will talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.